Right, well I've given the control surfaces that we previously glued together plenty of time to dry now, and now we can look at dealing with the seam lines and stuff on them. This one here I've already done. So this is one of the inner flap sections of the model. We've got join lines that need to be, or seam lines that need to be dealt with along the ends here, and also the leading and trailing edges. One of the things that they've done with this model is they've moulded small pins just in here, which you can probably just see. They are going to impede actually cleaning up that edge of the flap. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to nick that off with a scalpel blade. Okay. Make a little mark with the tip of the scalpel where that pin was, and then I'm going to use my pin vise to just make a hole there, which means that later on, should I want to replace that pin for the purposes of construction, it's easily achieved. So I've got a hole there to insert a new pin into. It also means that the trailing edge there, sorry, the edge of that flap surface is now completely clear of any obstructions, and can be sanded without any problems. Okay, so it's just a case of making sure that those holes are there, which I have. Okay, so with that done, we've got the basic part here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sander. This one's quite an old sander, as you can probably see, but it still does the job. And I'm just going to sand this flat surface slowly, carefully, keeping it as flat as I possibly can, just until I've removed all of the seam line from that. Okay, and then I'm going to switch to the fine side there. Give it a sand, and looking at that, that is actually that's fine. That's all that will need doing to that. So I'll switch to go to the other edge, and we're just repeating the process. Just like so. Again, switch to the fine edge, give it a sand, and that's that sanded as well. There's on the curved aerofoil section of the leading edge, there's obviously a join up there, which is very slight. So I'm just going to, again, using the long flat edge of my sanding stick, backed up with my fingers, just checking the keep it moving, so you don't want to be filing flats. There are of course other tools you can use for this. Obviously there's things like sponge sanders, and obviously more traditional wet and dry. This is just the method I prefer. So we've got to do the trailing edge. So there's been a little bit of glue seepage around the trailing edge here, so that's just the work of a few seconds with the fine edge to remove. Checking the underside as well. And then using the fine edge, just going around the trailing edge a little bit like that, just to make sure that's flat and level, and in scale it's a nice thickness in scale. And as you can see, that's taken me a couple of minutes to do that. Just a bit of fine Scotch-Brite here that I'm using, just going over all the edges. Something I'm doing with this, which is just my choice, it's strictly not really necessary, but I like to do it, is I'm just using a little scriber here, a Tamiya scriber, and I'm just pulling it down the panel lines using the weight more or less of the scriber itself. I'm not actually trying to make these lines any deeper, just perhaps a tiny bit sharper than they are, and that is literally it. So and that's it. It's also dealing with a couple of little glue marks that I've ended up with on the underside here. So once again, we're just going to go across it with the fine side of our sanding stick, and then polish it out with the fine Scotch-Brite. And that's our flap essentially done. There's a couple of bits that need to be added obviously before assembling it, but prior to assembling the actual getting them on the model, they can now be put to one side and left. So what we're going to do is we're going to work around all of the parts, all of the control surfaces that we've previously taken off. See the tail planes and elevators are now set in place. There's an insert for the starboard leading edge of this horizontal tail, which had a little intake on it, so we'll be adding that shortly. But that's basically all we're doing with the control surfaces. So I'll carry on doing that, and I'll come back to you when I've completed all the control surfaces that I glued together yesterday. As I say, big model, lots of parts, so it's kind of quite labour intensive and repetitive on this kind of stuff. But the sooner we get it done and out of the way, the sooner we can get on with building the actual model and enjoying the rest of the build. Right, so here we are. I've sanded and dealt with all of the control surfaces, all the leading edges where there's detail going around it has been rescribed. This one's got a peg on it because there was a slight issue with some of the glue not getting to this area here, so I've had to re-glue that. Just let it dry. It'll be a 2-minute job to do all that, so no problem. Tail planes are all dealt with here. I've also added the leading edge intake, which isn't a terribly good fit, but will be not difficult to deal with the issues with that when it's dry. So that's the tail planes done. The vertical tails and rudders. Hope you can see that I've slightly offset the actual rudders themselves from the tail planes, just to give it a little bit more of a sort of active look. I've also dealt with the wings, the initial part of the wings having been joined. I've sanded all the leading edges, tidied up the trailing edges, trimmed off the location points of the control surfaces so that I can add them later on in construction. So they're ready to be continued with. There's tiny little bits of trimming that can still be done in places like the mass balances here, which are very easy to just a little bit of clean out like that, and then we can be happy that things like the ailerons are going to simply clip into place, and you can set them how you want them. I'll probably set mine a little bit off, but not terribly. Again, it's all about just making the aircraft look a little bit busier. Now, if you look at the starboard wing, you can see that I've used an aerosol can to spray this centre portion. One of the things that was noted when this model was released is that there's some kind of a moulding scar or blemish down the starboard wing. It's not terribly big. You can feel it if you run your finger along there. What I've done is I've just added a bit of, I've just sprayed a bit of Tamiya's medium grey or dark grey, one of their gunship greys. In fact, it's AS27. Not that it matters, but I just gave that a light spray about an hour ago across there, let it dry. And what I'm going to do is we want to remove that moulding blemish if we can. So having painted it, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a reasonably coarse sanding sponge just to go across here. And what we're going to do is see if we can highlight what exactly the issue is. Okay, and I think you can fairly easily see already the blemish line that we've got coming down here. Okay, it's not huge, it's not a showstopper, and it will be the work of a couple of minutes to sand that away and remove it. Okay, so as I say, hopefully you can see that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to a medium to coarse sanding stick. Okay, use something that isn't soft. What you're doing is you're trying to level out a feature rather than just clean it up. So we need to level it out, so we need something that's quite firm in order to achieve that. So I'm just going to go across, and obviously I've added some dark grey paint, so it's going to be immediately apparent when I've levelled that feature out, isn't it? So as you can see, with that couple of seconds of sanding, we're already starting to remove that. So we've got the very last vestiges of it just here. Okay, a little bit more sanding. With this coarse stick, and there you go. That is the actual blemish itself removed. So what we now need to do is, there's a couple of things I want to do. Obviously you can see the surface detail there, so what I'm going to do is just pull my scriber across the area I've just sanded a couple of times, just to make sure that we haven't lost any of the surface detail, or if we have, we've restored it. Now the thing is that blemish in reality is so minor that the surface detail is still clearly visible even after using that coarse sanding stick. So it's present, and I would suggest it's better dealt with than left, but I'm kind of reluctant to make too much of an issue of it, because it really isn't. So there we go. I've pulled that. I've used that scriber to just eke out those panel lines again. So we're just going to go over the model, over this portion here. With various grades of sanding stick. Back to this coarse sanding sponge again. So, and now you can see that in a very few minutes I've gone from being able to clearly see that blemish to my wing being completely smooth. The interesting thing is that there's no similar marks anywhere else on the wings. There's a very small mark visible in roughly the same area on the port wing, but running my finger across it, I can't feel it, so I'm going to ignore it. So the only problem really is on the starboard upper side of the wing, which as you can see I've just dealt with. So I'm just going to give this a rub over with a little piece of my warm Scotch-Brite. And that's it done. One thing I am going to do is, where I've primed it, I'm going to remove the primer that I used to highlight the issue. Some people like to do it, some don't. I'm going to do it just because I want the model to look a bit neater as I'm building it. So I've used a little bit of Mr. Colour Thinner. To remove that primer. Like so. And that's it. Basically, at this point, you would struggle to realise that there was ever a problem with this wing that needed dealing with. So, yes, the problem that people have pointed out on this model, it is there, but I hope that's illustrated that it can be dealt with in really extremely quick time. It's no problem at all. So one of the things I'm going to do is looking at the assembly of the wings. There's a couple of small bulkheads that can be glued into the wing now, so I'm just going to have a look. Okay, so we've got, it's telling me that the port one, part number 54. And what we're doing here is I'm adding these just hopefully to establish a little bit of rigidity into the wing. No other reason really. So it's telling me that that part locates like so. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to check that, so part 54, I also need part 56 and also part 55, which is there, so that's part 55. It would have you in the instructions do this in several stages, but I'm going to add all these three main structural parts here. I'm just going to add in one go. These are all showing as keyed. Like so. And the last part we need is part 56. And there's part 56. So I'm deviating a little bit from the instructions here, but not very much at all. In that I just want to get this lot together and secured in place. Before we proceed, so that's telling me that that goes in there, that goes in there, and that locates onto there. So yeah, it's all seems to go together very well. So what I'm going to do is use my brush, because what I need to do is I need to get down inside there to the lower edge of that part, which is actually located inside the wing now. And again, it's keyed, so it is a firm location, no problem at all. So I'm just going to add a couple of dabs there. Add a couple of dabs to this part here, That's located in place as well. Okay. And with that done, we just need to see, it would have us locate that part there. It's actually a very nice piece of engineering, so that locates without any real issues. So I'll run a bit of glue in there, a little bit of glue along here, just pushing it down a tiny little bit and making sure it's lined up. And then lastly, just a little bit of glue along this edge here. And that's the first part of the wheel bay actually in place. So what I'm going to do is just look at the, I'm just going to snip the cowlings out. So we've got 58 and 60. So we've got 58 here. That's 58. And then finding the other screw with the other cowlings on it, it would have us use 58 and 60. So I'm just going to check how we're going here. Just going to do a very little bit of trimming here, but nothing. There's a bit of flash, but I'm just rapidly running around this, really, and okay. So these are our cowling parts, okay, the main engine nacelles I should say. So they locate, and the whole lot will then locate into the wing pretty much like so. And yeah, it's there's a small part, a piece of strut work that's supposed to go into the nacelle. But looking at this, it's very clear to me that this can be added after the nacelle is together without any trouble whatsoever, so that's what I'm proposing to do. And the whole thing really fits very nicely indeed. So it's just showing on the instructions that this goes together like that. We've got part 59 that needs to go into the into this as you build it. Okay, so as I've previously noted, in terms of my glues, I'm going to be using normal liquid poly for this to join these nacelles together, and I think I'm going to be using a little bit of masking tape just to hold it in place as it dries. So again, then as I go around, just going to use a little bit of tape as we go just to hold these together. There's a kind of ledge and recess on this lower join here, so I'm just going to run some glue into that from the underside just to see how it goes. I'm not entirely sure, but I think there might be a panel line down there afterwards which we can restore after getting this in place and sanding. But the fit is really quite nice. I'm tempted to add these to the at this point, add them straight to there, but what I want is there's plenty of room down inside here, hopefully for some nose weight, because this is obviously a serious tail sitter of an aeroplane, so we are going to be needing nose weight, and I want to maintain the ability to add nose weight to places should it turn out to be necessary. So I'm gluing these together, but I'm not going to glue them to the wing just yet. And if my application of glue looks a little bit clumsy, it really doesn't matter, because all these are going to be dealt with. All these joins need dealing with, so don't worry about it. Okay, and the other thing now is there's this bulkhead here, and we're just checking out to see which way it locates in. And that appears to be it, so that's adding a little bit more structural strength still to the whole assembly. So that is our wing and nacelle assembly essentially dealt with. Don't be afraid to run some some super glue along these joints from the inside to reinforce them if you're worried about them splitting later on. I might cover that as we get further into the assembly and these are ready to go on. But let's just have a little test fit now. So that is now assembled. So this should all clip into place pretty much on the wing, which it does. And as a dry fit, I'm suitably impressed with that. There's stuff that's going to be clearly visible in terms of joins on the interior here. We can try and camouflage those if we want. I'll see how I feel, as this is a strictly out of the box build, intended to be anyway. So we'll assess that later on. But really, that's a very firm fit. Very happy with that. So what I have to do now is go around and repeat that assembly procedure for the port wing, and on the next one hopefully I'll be showing you adding the leading edge. There's some leading edge intakes and stuff, wingtip lights, and we can deal with all the control surfaces. So I will see you when that's ready to be done.